Where's the Starship? The first orbital Starship is no longer at the launch site. What happened? Is it a bad sign? The Orbital Tank Farm is losing its tanks. Will they be replaced? SpaceX launches the first direct-to-cell capable Starlinks. What does this mean? And NASA is testing a rotating detonation rocket engine. Is this the future? The last few weeks at Starbase have been a testing frenzy. Booster 10 static fire, 2 Ship 28 ignitions, and now? Wait, something is wrong. What happened to the next orbital Starship? Do you want to find out? Let's dive right in. Starship updates. At the forefront of space exploration stands SpaceX's launch site, often dubbed the gateway to Mars, where the most powerful rockets ever created are prepared for their journey into space. Following the rapid completion of a 33-engine static fire test on Booster 10, all eyes were on the next move. Would it be another round of testing, or was there a rollback in the cards? The answer came on December 30th, when the next orbital booster was carefully taken off from the orbital launch mount and settled onto the new transport stand. Then, ushered by the SPM transporters complete with their counterweights, Booster 10 began its journey back to the build site, eventually making its way into the first megabay. But why take it back in the first place? Is there something wrong with it? Not necessarily. While there were some issues with the prototype during the initial tests, these were swiftly rectified on site. The SpaceX team will likely now remove all the additional sensors used during the static fire and finalize tasks such as hooking up the avionics systems. Basically, there might have been some unfinished tasks due to the push to complete testing in 2023. A couple of days later, attention shifted to the upper stage of the third Starship, known as Ship 28. It was attached to a crane and lifted onto a transport stand. Sometime later, workers were seen removing the squid attachment points and sealing the openings with heat tiles. This means that from this point, Ship 28 can only be hoisted via the ports beneath its flaps. It won't be lifted onto the test pad again. Following these modifications, the prototype was relocated to the high bay after its impressively swift and successful test campaign. Later, it was positioned on the bay's turntable, indicating that additional work was needed. One theory is that Ship 28 could be loaded with a few Starlink satellites, or perhaps a mass simulator emulating such a payload. This comes from the fact that shortly after the first static fire of this prototype, SpaceX tested its payload bay. Add to this the second static fire that simulated firing a Raptor engine in space, and things start to look interesting. Could IFT-3 be a fully orbital launch with a payload on board? I sure hope so. However, at this stage, this is merely an educated guess. I can't wait to see both prototypes back at the launch site. How long do you think it will be? A few weeks, a month, or even longer? Share your predictions in the comments. Once they do eventually return, there won't be many steps left before we see another launch attempt. The orbital launch mount is currently undergoing finishing touches, likely culminating with another coat of paint covering its legs. The next steps would typically involve stacking the vehicle and conducting last pre-flight checks, possibly including a wet dress rehearsal to simulate flight-like conditions. However, SpaceX's recent approach has been somewhat unpredictable, so it's possible that they may skip the wet dress rehearsal entirely. And of course, FAA clearance and other bureaucratic stuff will play a role in timing the third flight. I do think that this time SpaceX may opt to approach this quietly, aiming for efficiency rather than publicity. Pressuring the FAA by saying that Starship is ready to launch over and over is probably not the way to go in the long run. Who knows, with no involvement from the Fish and Wildlife Services this time, the approval process might already be nearing completion. We'll just have to wait and see, but the end of January or first half of February is beginning to look like a viable window for the next big step in Starship history. IFT-3 is rapidly getting closer. As SpaceX continues preparing the prototypes for the next launch, engineers are also focusing on significant upgrades to the Orbital Tank Farm. A few episodes ago, we saw the installation of 6 enormous tanks at the launch site. I said it a few times, they will likely replace all the vertical tanks which have been problematic since day one. Typically, when you need cryogenic storage, you purchase the necessary vessels from specialized manufacturers. You notice, I'm not the only one buying cryotanks on a regular basis, right? However, this is SpaceX. They love to innovate and try new things. Thus, instead of outsourcing, they decided to build the tanks right at Starbase, taking inspiration from Starship. It's pretty good at holding propellant, at least when it's in one piece. Ground support equipment tanks derived from Starship were a genius idea at the time. As to manufacture them, workers could have just used the equipment they already had on hand. That's why back in 2021, the construction of the first GSE tank began in the now non-existent mid-bay. The result was 8 self-made tanks, although it's worth mentioning that GSE-4 was repurposed as a test tank, leaving 7 in operational service within the farm. To enhance efficiency and minimize thermal losses, these tanks were later enveloped in 12-meter or 39-foot diameter cryogenic shells, with perlite insulation filling the space between the shell and the tank. While the concept of a self-fabricated tank farm initially seemed promising, hindsight reveals the challenges with this approach. For example, issues with regulatory approval. SpaceX's plan included 3 liquid oxygen tanks, 2 nitrogen tanks, 1 water tank, and 2 methane tanks. However, obtaining approval for the methane tanks proved impossible due to their close proximity to other critical infrastructure. Without a massive wall, a leak in one of these tanks could result in a massive explosion, and the huge amount of liquid oxygen located just meters away definitely didn't help. So, in a first step, the 2 methane tanks were converted into water tanks. A practical solution given the regulatory hurdles. In the end, SpaceX had 3 water tanks, 1 empty cryogenic shell and 2 GSE tanks changed into water tanks. As water doesn't need insulation, these particular shells weren't filled with perlite. As time passed, it became evident that the water tank made from the cryo shell began to leak. That's not good. The situation only got worse when Starship actually launched and completely obliterated the shells with shockwaves and concrete chunks. They were later patched up, but this was only a temporary solution. Despite measures like the deluge system, the tank's longevity was compromised, and the damages sustained over 2 launches suggested their service life was nearing its end. In December, when the LR-11000 crane was positioned near the tank farm, everyone hoped that it might be a signal that the vertical tanks were about to go. In the end, the crane was only parked there for testing. That was until January 4th, when signs of actual progress were observed. The load spreader, previously utilized in constructing the tank farm, appeared at the launch site, and shortly after, Shell 2, the original water tank, was hoisted and placed in front of the farm. Workers wasted little to no time immediately cutting it up into pieces. The following day, Shell 8 was taken off, exposing the stainless steel tank beneath. At the time of recording this episode, it is also in the process of being scrapped. Shell 6 is expected to meet the same fate, yet the stainless steel tanks themselves might not be removed for now. After all, water is an essential resource at Starbase, used not only for the Fyrex system but also for the pressurization of the rest of the tanks within the farm. As the liquid nitrogen, oxygen, and methane are consumed, a portion of it is heated by the stored water to vaporize, maintaining pressure within the tanks. This process is necessary to prevent them from collapsing during Starship testing. In simple words, without water, spin primes, static fires, and flights would be impossible, which is why the tanks themselves are expected to remain in place for the moment. However, we might witness the introduction of a new pressurization system, potentially involving vaporizers, which could eliminate the need for huge water reserves. While a dedicated tank for the Fyrex system is still necessary, it could be substantially smaller and relocated elsewhere within the tank farm's footprint. It's also important to point out that these tanks have nothing to do with the flame deflector. It has its own separate water supply located behind the launch tower. For now, the dismantling of the 3 shells may be as far as they go. However, I think it's only a matter of time until we see the vertical tanks phased out entirely. Was a cool idea, but to actually be better than regular cryogenic storage, it would have to go through a few iterations, just like Starships. Removing these tanks is a good step, but it also leaves SpaceX with a mess of unneeded plumbing and longer than needed pipes to reach pumps and other infrastructure. When do you expect to see the original tank farm retire? Place your bets in the comments. Now, turning our attention to the build site, this is where the action unfolds. The high bay has been a hive of activity with the movement of the last V1 Starships. At the close of December, Ship 30 was relocated from its stand to a thrust simulator, subsequently making its journey to Massey's test site. On January 3rd, this prototype underwent a standard cryogenic test of both of its tanks. Did you know that most prototypes at Massey's undergo 2 cryogenic tests before returning to the build site for engine installation? While it took nearly 4 months for Ship 28 to go from cryogenic testing to static fire, Ship 30 will likely do this much quicker. As long as SpaceX doesn't get rid of Pad B. After a not so short stay in the rocket garden, Ship 31 recently made its way back to the high bay. On January 5th, it was equipped with its aft flap, so soon it should be ready for Massey's. Currently, the high bay houses 3 ships, the next orbital prototype, Ship 28 on the left, Ship 32 in the right back corner, and Ship 31 positioned at the front. Now, for those meticulously tracking the whereabouts of the Starship prototypes, you might wonder about Ship 29. Where is it? Was it scrapped? The answer is no. In a surprising turn of events on December 29th, Ship 29 started the new phase of operations at Starbase by being transferred not back to the rocket garden, but to Mega Bay 2. This confirms the speculation about this building being designated for ships, not boosters. Later, this prototype was placed on the ship engine installation stand that was installed there some time ago. Unlike the more cramped high bay, Mega Bay will allow rotating the vehicles freely without the need to get other prototypes out of the way. The main construction of this building appears to have come to an end. In early January, crews dismantled the massive crane that allowed them to lift the pieces of the second Mega Bay. While some roof work remains, it's likely that it can be completed without the need for the colossal Leaper crane. Turning our attention to the rocket garden, Ship 26 continues to be an enigma, undergoing extensive reinforcement using numerous stringers. Initially, it might have looked like standard payload bay area reinforcement work, but now it looks like it's getting out of hand. The whole ship is turning into one massive stringer. What on earth is happening here? Is it being prepped for a propellant transfer test, or is it just a training prototype for new employees at SpaceX? What are your thoughts on Ship 26? Could it be related to the HLS program, or is it something entirely different? Share your theories in the comments, I always love reading them. Now, here's a little task for you before we continue with the news. YouTube may have unsubscribed you without your knowledge. This has happened to thousands of Y viewers, and they seem to do this frequently. Please double check that you've hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss our updates. While checking, hit the like button and consider becoming a Y supporter for exclusive SpaceX updates. With it, you get access to daily Starbase photo galleries now including orbital, aerial and ground photos of SpaceX's progress and countless other extras on top. No matter how much you decide to give, everyone gets the same supporter content and access. You decide what you want to give. Check our new website as well, launch previews, road closures, the latest weather report and our multi-stream viewer whataboutit.space. The link to our Patreon page and the new website is in the description. Thanks to all the supporters who help fulfill dreams for our team. We can't thank you enough, you rock. While Starship's development often dominates headlines, SpaceX's innovation isn't confined to Starbase alone. The recent launch of Starlinks from California highlights another step in the evolution of this platform. The journey of Starlink began in 2018 with the launch of 2 test satellites, Tintin A and Tintin B. By the following year, SpaceX had commenced the deployment of the V1 satellites, popularizing the phrase "another batch of 60 Starlink satellites" as regular launches filled the sky with these internet beaming devices. The next significant update came in 2021 with the introduction of the V1.5 satellites. Heavier than their predecessors, these guys boasted inter-satellite communication capabilities, enabling Starlink to provide service in areas without ground stations, like in Antarctica. But innovation didn't stop there. In 2022, the V2 mini satellites were introduced, marking a leap in functionality. These new satellites featured an additional second solar array and offered enhanced speeds and capacity, pushing the limits of what the Falcon 9 could transport. The most recent advancement came on January 2nd, when SpaceX launched a batch of 21 satellites, 6 of which were outfitted with technology for direct-to-cell communication. All this is very similar to all of SpaceX's developments. Innovation and development never really stop. Announced in August 2022, Direct-to-Cell allows smartphones to communicate directly with a Starlink satellite. How cool is that? Imagine being stranded in a remote area with no cell reception. Starlink's direct-to-cell capability could be a lifeline, enabling you to send an SOS message with your location to emergency services. From anywhere. Can you imagine how many tragic castaway situations can be prevented with this? Sorry Wilson, your friend just got picked up by an Uber. Beyond emergency communications, this technology is also slated to support voice calls and even internet data transfer, with service rollout expected in 2025. Nothing like watching Y in the Sahara Desert. The best part about it is that it works with all smartphones that support LTE, eliminating the need for additional software or hardware. You simply aim your phone at the right point in the sky to connect and it just works. However, this technology isn't without its limitations. At present, the bandwidth available per beam is 7 megabytes, and given that each beam covers a massive area, the available bandwidth will be shared among all users within that beam's footprint. This means that in densely populated areas or during times of heavy usage, the available speed per user could barely allow sending a single message. While this won't replace traditional cell towers, it can revolutionize connectivity in remote and extreme locations. Imagine having cell reception anywhere on Earth, literally. This is so cool. Will this work from a plane? Meanwhile, in another corner of the space industry, NASA is exploring the frontiers of in-space propulsion with something known as the Rotating Detonation Rocket Engine. This is bigger than you probably think. To grasp the concept of RDEs, we have to understand the difference between deflagration and detonation. Deflo, what? Alright, give me a sec. Deflagration is a type of combustion where the flame front moves at a speed slower than the speed of sound, so it's subsonic. This is the principle behind most conventional rocket engines. Turbopumps feed oxygen and fuel into the combustion chamber where the mixture ignites, right? The resulting gases then expand and exit through the nozzle, reaching high velocity and generating thrust. Simple, right? Well, not exactly, but after all, it's rocket science. Detonation is another type of combustion where the flame front speed exceeds that of sound, generating shock waves. An explosion. This rapid release of energy is potent, but not really that useful for rocket engines if it occurs in a single uncontrolled burst. For continuous thrust, the detonation would need to be sustained and controlled, requiring the fuel mixture to detonate hundreds of times per second. Not an easy task. However, by leveraging the properties of detonation in a clever design, engineers can create continuous thrust. Instead of allowing the detonation wave to escape the engine, it can be confined to circulate within the combustion chamber in a pattern. This continuous circular detonation wave means the exhaust gases exit the engine at much higher velocities, significantly increasing thrust. As long as the engine is fed a steady supply of fuel and oxidizer, and as long as the shockwave maintains its momentum around the chamber, the process can be self-sustained. Rotating detonation rocket engines offer several advantages, including higher efficiency due to their compact design and less complex fuel delivery systems. They could theoretically offer up to 25% more efficiency than traditional rocket engines, though a more realistic expectation might be a 5 to 10% increase. Even that is a huge increase though. This could translate into heavier payloads or reduced fuel consumption, both highly desirable in spaceflight. Yet, mastering the controlled, sustained detonation required for RDREs is a complex challenge, one that scientists and engineers have been trying to figure out for years. NASA is at the forefront of this research, dedicating substantial resources and know-how to the development of this type of engine. They recently showcased yet another video of a 3D printed RDRE operating continuously for 251 seconds. That is over 4 minutes. The achieved thrust of 5,800 pounds or approximately 26,000 newtons is comparable to the Rutherford engine used in Rocket Lab's Electron. While RDREs are still years away from practical, everyday use in space missions, NASA's ongoing tests and developments are incredibly promising. This may become the next big thing for deep space exploration, and I am all here for it. That is it for today. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe for more awesome content. This is what fuels the algorithm and helps us immensely. Check out our epic shirts in your favorite Space Nerd store. The link is in the description. And if you want to train your space IQ even further, watch this video next to continue your journey. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next episode. I was compromised. Desirable. Diameter cryogenic shells. Efficiency. Of the wee